Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back again. Another RfRx session. My name is Amaya Perez. I'm the Online Programming Director of RfR, and I'm here with Eric Wells, who is the Support Group Director, and today we are both going to be your co-hosts. So thank you so much, Eric, for being here, and welcome back.
Well, thanks for having me back again. I know that you're the Online Programming Director, and you coordinate all of this, and at a drop of a hat, at any time, the whim suits your fancy, you can obviously cut me from this. And so I just am appreciative that you let me come back every week. It's a cool thing. And just don't let all that power go to your head. That is my only recommendation from a humble position.
I'll do my best, but I feel like now I understand why you're always so nice to me. It's not genuine kindness. You're just scared of being fired.
Yeah,
I would
exactly.
never, obviously.
Well, folks, at the beginning of every RfRx, we have a poll, and these poll questions are kind of designed to get you thinking about what the topic is we're going to talk about today. So I am going to go ahead and launch the poll, and there are several questions here, only 3, and they are the answers are all on a scale of 1 to 5, from strongly disagree to number 5 being strongly agree. The first question is, I have a clear moral code by which to evaluate my actions and the actions of others. Question number 2, I have a source of strong moral guidance. Question number 3, I feel confident in my moral decision making. So those are the 3 questions we've got, and I'll give you some time to answer those as we kind of go through this introduction. And I just want to remind you, like I do every week, that these answers are anonymous, so we're not going to be able to know how you answer which question. So feel free to answer them truthfully. All right. I also wanted to give a shout out to the Atheist Community of Discord, formerly the Atheist Community of Austin's Discord channel, but now they've renamed it and it's the Atheist Community of Discord. We're going to go ahead and put the link to it in the chat, and it'll also be in the description on YouTube. The Atheist Community of Discord, or ACD, is just kind of a fantastic community of folks who can kind of get together and have conversations, and there are some lasting friendships that are made out of there too. So if you're looking for a community and maybe aren't around somewhere that there's an active secular community out there, feel free to give them a try and join up, see what if it suits your fancy. Amaya, so we're here for RfRx. What is this all about?
So, as always, RfRx is basically a series of online weekly sessions in which we bring in guests to discuss different topics that are relevant to anyone who is either living religion or has already left religion. If you have any sort of questions, any feedback, any suggestions of guests or topics, anything you want us to know, you can just email us at rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And if you want to watch any of our previous sessions, they will all be uploaded to our YouTube channel, and that is youtube.com/recoveringfromreligion. So that's basically what RfRx is. And in general, in RfR, what we do is help people who are, again, struggling with living religion. And we have a mission statement. And that mission statement is that we offer hope, healing, and support to those who are, again, struggling with issues of religion and unbelief. So, Eric, do you want to explain how we offer hope, please?
You bet I do. I was literally waiting for you to ask me that question. So we offer hope in the sharing and listening to personal stories. I kind of talk about this every week, but still, it's really kind of impactful, and it's something that kind of really helped me get over and help me kind of heal with some of my own issues that I was struggling with coming out of religion. So the sharing and listening to personal stories, if I can hear a story and someone tells me a story or read a story or listen to a story, something that I can relate to and something that really kind of touches me deeply, it's an opportunity that that may give me some hopes, a light at the end of the tunnel. If this person went through it and came out of it okay, then perhaps I can too. So you can check out all of these stories on our podcast and on our blog. We've got some really great articles on our blog too, so please head on over there and take a look. So the second part of our mission statement is healing. And Amaya, tell us about how RfR deals with healing.
Yes, so for healing we have the helpline, and this is basically a space in which you can contact one of our trained agents, and they will listen to you with an empathetic ear and no judgment or criticism to any issue that you may have related to religion. This is a completely confidential, safe, and 24/7 resource. So if you feel like you could use this, I highly, highly encourage you to do it, because so many people have come back to us with feedback that it really does help. So if you need someone to talk to, please contact one of our helpline agents. They're absolutely amazing. And apart from the helpline, we also have a resource list. And basically, this is a list of so many different resources that we have, which includes articles, podcasts, videos, books, just anything you can imagine, you will find it there. And we also have it divided by topic. So if you want to search for, I don't know, how to overcome the fear of hell, you can look for specific resources related to that. If you want, I don't know, if you're an ex-Muslim that is trying to get out of religious indoctrination, we also have resources for that. So we have resources of all sorts of different topics. So I feel like it's a really good like library kind of thing, which you can access if you feel like you could use just a video or a text or, whichever format you feel like is best for you. Now, Eric, since you are the support director, should you go ahead and speak about support?
Okay, you got it. I have no problem talking about that. It's like every opportunity I get to talk about the support groups, I'm going to take it. And so you've given me an opportunity, so here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, there are RfR support groups scattered all over the world. There's well over 50 of them. And if you are looking to have some face-to-face interaction, a place where you can do some of the long-term healing, like Amaya just talked about the helpline, and that's somewhere to go when you need something immediately, like an immediate resource, immediately somebody to talk about, like you're struggling and you're in pain, you need to talk to someone right now, use the helpline. But when you're ready to do some of that long-term healing, some of that long-term work to kind of identify and work through some of the issues and possibly even some trauma that you've had stemming from your religious background. This is what the support groups are for. We meet face to face or in person normally, but now due to COVID, obviously, we're meeting through Zoom. Take a look at the link in the chat and in the description to find a support group near you. In addition to that, we have the Secular Therapy Project. So both the helpline and the support groups, those are ran purely peer support. So no one there is going to claim to be like professionally trained to work as a healthcare professional. That's just peer support. But oftentimes we're going to need more than just the peer support. And that's where we've got the Secular Therapy Project. That's what that's all about. If you're looking for a secular therapist, check out the Secular Therapy Project, because they are carefully screened to make sure that each therapist has their appropriate licensing in the state or country to make sure that they maintain a secular practice, so you won't run the risk of getting proselytized to. In addition to that, they also make sure that each one of these therapists run an evidence-based practice. So head on over to seculartherapy.org and connect with a therapist nearby you. And even if it's not near you, so many therapists are doing telehealth these days that it's easier than ever to just kind of find one and work through maybe a list of them until you feel like there's someone that works for you. All right, up next, Amaya, what do you want to talk about?
So I'm just going to briefly mention the online community, which is basically a platform in which you can chat and meet people who share similar backgrounds as you. So, for example, if you are someone from the LGBTQ plus community and you're struggling to leave religion, you can find other people who share the same background as you. We also have groups for Australians, for females, for Spanish speakers, for specific religions. So we really have a group for everybody, and I'm sure we will find a place for you. So if you would like to join one of these groups, all you have to do is contact one of our helpline agents, and if you qualify for them, then they will let you know how to join. These groups, apart from chat, they also hold weekly or bi-weekly, depends on which group, I think, meetings, so Zoom meetings, which is also, I feel like, a really warm way of connecting with other people. So again, if you feel like you could use this, please do contact one of our helpline agents, because they will definitely help you out. And I feel like it's a resource that is helping a lot of people. And then before we jump into the actual RfRx, I'm just going to have a brief advert moment where I'm just going to encourage everyone to volunteer for RfR, because RfR is exclusively based by volunteers. Danielle is doing this voluntarily. Eric and I are doing it also, and every single person that's working in RfR is a volunteer. So if you feel like you have a bit of extra time in your hands, if you feel like you want to help other people, if you believe in what RfR is doing, I highly encourage you to join us as a volunteer. We have all sorts of different roles that you can be a part of. We have obviously the helpline agent. You could be a support group leader. You could be a researcher. You could be so many different things. So if it's something that you're interested in, all you have to do is go to our volunteering page, and on a personal note, help me with my mental health and also with developing skills. So please do give it a try. We will definitely welcome you. And now let's jump to finally the actual RfRx thing. So Eric, I know everybody probably already knows how we do things here, but do you want to explain the format just in case there's anyone new?
Yeah, you bet. So tonight, in every RfRx, we have a discussion. We have a topic. We're going to discuss it. We bring on this amazing experts, and tonight is no different. So we're going to have this discussion over this topic with our expert for about an hour. But during this conversation, you're probably going to have some questions, and that's perfectly normal, perfectly fine. And if you have a question, please feel free to type it into the chat, both here on Zoom or over at the ACD Discord. And if the question is maybe a little too personal, feel free to send one of us a message with that question in there. So we will gather up all those questions. We're going to save them, and after the discussion is over, we'll have about a 20-30 minute Q&A session. And that's where we will ask that expert your burning questions. And then after that, we're going to hear from our Executive Director, Gayle Jordan, because she's got an RfR minute, something she has to say, something that's just brilliant. We'll learn all about it. Once that's over, we'll shut off the recording, open up the lines, and hopefully hang out with the guest and just kind of have a hangout. It's really kind of a fun time. But without further ado, Amaya, would you like to introduce our guest?
So Danielle is a PhD, and she helps moms grapple with what it is that makes a person. She is a philosophical coach and co-creator and co-host of the Think Hard podcast, which brings philosophy to the real world. Obviously, she has a PhD in philosophy and a graduate certificate in women in philosophy from the American Philosophical Practitioners Association. When her daughter was born, she almost broke her brain trying to figure out what the hell happened, and now she helps other moms make sense of motherhood. So, Danielle, welcome.
Thanks, Amaya, and thank you for having me back at RfRx. It's really great to be here. I am a philosopher, as you said, and I work primarily with moms on the issues, on what I call the existential crisis of motherhood. And I have a new course. Well, I have a course that I've been teaching for a while called The Meaning of Motherhood, but now thanks to the world we find ourselves in, that course is online.
Yeah, and we've got a link in here to that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's on your website? Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. So this is like your third time on RfRx? Yeah, you're pretty darn popular, and looking at some of the YouTube numbers, just the content, the topics, and the way you discuss things, people love watching it. So we're just grateful to have you back. So we're here to talk about morality. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Morality without religion, or morality without God.
So where would we possibly start? Because when I have discussions with folks, like on the street, like an Ask an Atheist event, or even in various debates, this is something that actually comes up quite a lot. It seems like many religious people think that their religion has the market, that have cornered the market on morality.
Yeah, and I was raised sort of evangelical Christian, and when I lost my faith when I was in college, it was a real crisis for me too. It was this like, how do I think about what is to guide me now? What should guide my actions and guide my choices? And actually, the course I took in college, which kind of set me down the path of sort of veering off from religion, was an ethics course, right? And it was the first time I had thought about the fact that you could think about right and wrong and how to guide your life independent of religion. And so I want to share with you the text that I read that kind of started me on this journey. And this is actually a really old ancient text. It's one of the Socratic dialogues. So it's a dialogue between Socrates and this lawyer at the time in ancient Greece named Euthyphro. And Socrates, had this habit of going and talking to just like the people in town to try and figure out what's true and good and right and just and beautiful. And he was having this conversation with Euthyphro, who was a lawyer and who was actually prosecuting his father because his father had a slave that he accidentally killed. So this enslaved this enslaved person, he'd done something, I can't even remember what he did, but he'd done something that Euthyphro's father didn't like, and as punishment, he tied him up and left him in a ditch for a while, and when he went back to go get him, the guy was dead. So Euthyphro, as a prosecutor and as a lawyer, was like, well, I don't care that this is my dad, he killed someone unjustly, and he should be prosecuted. And so, but he was trying to figure out if this was the right thing to do, if he should be prosecuting his father or not. So he and Socrates get into this conversation about, well, how do we know what the right thing to do is? And they go back and forth for a little bit, and Euthyphro says, well, I know what the right thing to do is. I know what the pious thing is. Things are pious if the gods approve of them. And Socrates is like, well, yeah, but some gods may approve of it, and other gods may not approve of it. And he's like, well, okay, it's good if all the gods together approve of it. If they're all unanimous, then it's the right thing to do. And Socrates asks the question, which is the question in metaethics, right? The study of ethics. Is something good or pious or right? He says, is it pious because the gods love it? Or do the gods love it because it's pious? And really what that question,
yeah,
right?
That's a great question.
It's is something right and good because God approves of it, or because culture approves of it, or because you or I approve of it? Or is it good independent of those things? Right? So this is like a wedge between what's right and God's opinion of it, or anyone else's.
I like that. That's even what that was 2,500 years ago. They're having this discussion. 2,500 years ago, they were having this discussion, and it kind of made that point. It's an excellent point. I love it. So how would you kind of define morality? In a sense, unless we're getting down that road, just to kind of start off as a base level.
For definitional question of it?
Yeah.
Well, I think philosophers talk about morals and they talk about ethics, and generally, I think you can kind of use them interchangeably, right? The way that I've always sort of thought about it is that ethics is sort of the study of what's right and wrong, where morality is a particular code of what's right and wrong, right? So this moral code.
Yeah, I like that distinction because that's something that's always kind of confused me. I've used them interchangeably as well, and having that distinction, this study of morals would be ethics. That totally makes sense to me.
Yeah, but I think people generally use them interchangeably, and that's fine. I think so too. Yeah, so it's really the question about what the right course of action is, right? It's a question about how, as we're social creatures, we live in the world with other humans, and sometimes our interests come to conflict. And so it's figuring out what the appropriate action is to take in a given situation, right? And a particular moral code will point you in a specific direction based on whatever that code dictates, right? But that question of, is morality connected to a certain God or a certain culture or a certain way of thinking? And it just sort of depends on who you ask, right? You ask a Christian, they'll give you one set of right and wrong. You ask, someone who lives in 2nd century BCE Greece, they will give you a different moral code about what's right and wrong. And so it's really a question of like, what is right and wrong may depend on who you ask and when and where you are, or maybe it has nothing to do with who you ask and when and where you are. Things are just wrong because they're wrong. It doesn't matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, lying is wrong, killing is wrong, abusing small children is wrong, regardless.
It almost seems like there needs to be sort of like a stated goal or stated, understanding in order to sort of define these sets of morals or something.
Yeah, so it depends, right? Like, in philosophy, there are generally 3, maybe 4 major ethical schools of thought. So the first one is known as utilitarian ethics, right? And the idea there is the right thing is the action that will bring about the greatest good for the greatest number of people, right? And so that's the goal, as you say. That's sort of like the guiding principle for that way of thinking about morality, right? But then there's the second one is called deontology, and the idea there is, well, the right action doesn't depend on the outcome. The action is either right or wrong in and of itself, right? So let me give you 2 examples. The trolley experiment. I'm sure many of the people here have heard of the trolley experiment, right? This is the classic thought experiment when thinking about utilitarian ethics. So let's say you got a trolley coming down the track, and there's a fork in the track, right? And on one side, you've got 5 people who have been tied to the track by a nasty villain or something and find themselves on the track there. And on the other side, there's 1 person tied to the track, right? And so, you're standing on a bridge, you're looking at what's happening, and next to you, there's a big lever that says if you pull this lever, the trolley, which is supposed to go to those 5 people, will be diverted and actually only hit the 1 person, right? And so, you ask a utilitarianist, or a utilitarian philosopher, what should you do? And they would say, well, greatest good for the greatest number of people. So, you pull the lever, you save the 5 people, you kill the 1 person. Now you have an action, and through your action, someone who would not have died is going to die, but you have saved those 5 people, right? The problem with that, and that seems, for a lot of us, that's sort of the way we think about things, is that like, you want to save the number of people, the most number of people that you can. But it gets really tricky, because what if you didn't realize that 1 person that you just killed actually had the cure for cancer? And now that person won't live to save all of those people who would have died of cancer. And now you've actually, instead of doing the right thing, you've actually done the morally wrong thing. And then now you can't undo that, right? So that's tricky. It also gets tricky when you think about, okay, well, let's say same scenario, but instead of a lever that you pull to divert the train, instead, standing next to you on the bridge is just a very large person. And you know that if you push this person off the bridge, the train will stop and it'll save the 5 people. Really no different in terms of the numbers, right? Say, you sacrifice 1 to save the 5, but it feels somehow more wrong than just pulling a lever and killing someone that would not died otherwise, right? So this is a principle, and you'll notice that idea of the greatest good for the greatest number of people has nothing to do with any religious or supernatural, origin, right? It just says, like, we're humans that live in a society and we want to maximize happiness in the world. And so we're going to act in a way to maximize happiness, right? And that's a human value. And we can try and do that, but as we see, it's very sticky, very quickly.
And how do you feel about negative utilitarianism? I know maybe this is too like personal, but yeah, just to know your thoughts.
So are you talking about sort of like negative responsibility?
Also in the sense that it works the same as normal utilitarianism, but increasing happiness would never be at the cost of the suffering of someone else. So, for example, if you have to kill one person to make 5 people 10 points happier, you wouldn't be able to, even if in the classical utilitarianism you would, because it works in almost like mathematical way.
Yeah, so there is a kind of like way to talk about the utilitarian approach that does have kind of like a stopgap there, where it's like, yeah, you can maximize the number of greatest good for the greatest number as long as you don't go around like killing people and harvesting their organs for the people who don't have them, right? Like it's just there is clearly a problem there. But the question then becomes, okay, well, which are the actions that you decide are no good regardless, right? Where do you put the stop at? Where do you put those stop gaps at? And why?
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking more in like a philosophical sense, in the sense that I'm not bringing it to the real world. It's more like there is definitely an answer of what would create more happiness and decrease suffering, but we are probably not able to know that answer because we have not got,
Right. Yeah, I mean, and that's part of the problem, right? You don't necessarily know if saving these 5 people will result in like how many units of happiness are we talking, right? 10 points happiness, how much is that? Like, how do we measure it, and who gets to decide how many units of happiness are being passed around? One person 10 units happier, or 10 people 1 unit happier, right? Like,
well, it sounds like then things may be relative to the situation, or is there some sort of like absolute set of morals? Like, but it does kind of seem like things change with the situation.
So yeah, in utilitarianism they do, and I just want to like quickly note that in different parts of the world, right now because of the COVID crisis, like we are doing utilitarian calculations as societies all the time right now, right? We are like, and people are in different places on that, right? Many of our governments have decided that it would be better for society in general to shut down economic processes and exchange so that we can save people's lives. Although there are plenty of people who are just like, well, you gotta, crack a few eggs to make an omelet. Let's like let the virus run its course so that all of us can, who are make it through to the other side, will have another side to make it through to, or whatever, right? So like, these are things that are not just like abstract trolley fun thought experiments. These are calculations that our politicians and our citizens are making all the time, right? But your question, Eric, about that, like, is it relative? Utilitarianism, it has a guiding principle that is clear, right? And that guiding principle is just a decision that we are going to decide that we value happiness, however we define that, and maximizing that happiness through our actions. But what counts as maximizing happiness can change from situation to situation based on the consequences. Now that's one way of thinking about morality. Another way of thinking about morality comes primarily from Immanuel Kant. He's the one who talked about it in philosophy. And he says, look, actions are right or wrong regardless of the outcome. Like, killing someone is wrong. The end. I don't care if you save 10,000 people by killing this one person. You don't do it. End. Period.
And he was alive before Hitler came to power.
He was. He was. Right?
Do you think that would have changed his mind at all?
I'm not sure I want to make any guesses about that. Well, but the thing about it, so Kant is often considered to be this kind of like the cowboy, of morality in philosophy. If philosophy can have like badass cowboy types, then I guess Kant would be it. But there's also like a situation in which people who maybe they grew up, for example, with the 10 Commandments, right? The 10 Commandments are a deontological code, where it's like, you don't steal, you don't lie, you don't kill, period, the end, no matter what the circumstances are in the story. I don't care how much happiness it will maximize to do the opposite. And that might be something that's really appealing to you. And certainly it's much less fuzzy than the utilitarian way of looking at things, right? It's like, it doesn't care about the consequences. And so, as you said, Amaya, we don't have to like pretend to be God and do all of these like weird calculations about the maximum happiness outcomes, because we're not concerned about the outcomes. We're concerned about the actions and their rightness and wrongness in and of themselves. So that might be really appealing. But there's also another thought experiment that tests this way of looking at it. So, for example, let's say I come to you, Eric, and I'm like knocking on your door. I run over, I knock on your door, you open the door, and I'm like huffing and puffing, and I'm like, Eric, you gotta let me in the house. Amaya's after me. We had a kind of a disagreement. I think she's trying to kill me. You have to hide me, right? And so you're like, cool. All right, come on in. You can hide in the basement, right? Shut the door. 5 minutes later, hear a knock on the door. Amaya's there, and she's got like a big butcher knife in her hand, which you see as she hides it behind her back. And she's like, oh, hey, Eric. So I was just looking for Danielle. Have you seen her? Right?
That sounds like the Amaya I know.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So Kant would say, look, and this was actually like a thought experiment that he commented on. He said, if this were to happen, the right thing to do, well, let me ask you, Eric, what is the right thing to do?
Well, my just first instinct is to lie. Like, no, I haven't seen her, or I saw her go that way towards the police station or something like that.
Right. Yeah, that's the first instinct, because you think, well, lying would result in a better outcome here, right? We think about the outcomes, and we think lying could result in the murder of my friend, and so I'm going to lie to try and prevent that from happening, right? And the utilitarians would say that is the right thing to do, right? Lying is not only morally acceptable or permissible, it's actually appropriate. It's like what you ought to do is to lie, right? Kant says lying is not okay. The end. You, Eric, are not, and then if you're like, oh yeah, she's in the basement, then Maya's like, great, I need to go to the basement to check something. Will you let me in? Right? Or
can I come in and fix your water heater, Eric? I have my knife to fix the water heater.
Says Amaya is her own moral agent. You are your own moral agent. What you are responsible for is your own moral actions. And you got to keep yourself clean. You wouldn't do things like sulking yourself by lying. Amaya is her own moral agent, and she wants to go around murdering people. That's on her. Right?
Wow, that is pretty cut and dry. That's hard. That's hard to swallow. That view of the world.
It is, which is sort of why Kant gets that reputation of being the hard-ass moral cowboy. Right? And I think a lot of us would balk at that and say, I don't know, something about that just doesn't feel quite right. Right?
That sounds very very concrete and no wiggle room and unflinching, unbending, unyielding. Just seems like there's this list of things you have to do to keep yourself clean, like you had mentioned, morally, and you cannot ever divert from that, no matter what the situation.
Yeah, well, and that kind of he had this guiding principle. In the same way that the utilitarians have this guiding principle of maximum good for the maximum number of people, Kant also had a guiding principle. And he said you should act such that you would want your actions to be enacted by all of humanity, right? So sometimes people try and introduce some wiggle room here, right? He says look, you don't lie, because if you lie, then you're saying that lying is okay for other people to do, and if other people lie, then society falls apart, so you don't lie, right? So some people try and say like, well, maybe you could say that anyone in this situation would lie in this situation, and that's what we would want all people to do. But the problem with that is then it like really proliferates out and gets really messy, where it's like, well, exactly how is your guiding principle happening here? And are you, and Kant himself was clear. It's just like, you don't lie, period. Right?
Sorry. So how does he decide which are the moral principles that they're unbreakable? Like, why is lying bad? Does it have a rationale behind each like commandment in a way? Because it does sound a bit like, like God trying to set up a few rules that you cannot break under any circumstance, and also across different cultures, which may value different things in terms of happiness and pain.
Yeah, right. So that's a great question. So that guiding principle, act such that you would want all humanity to act in that way, it's kind of his guiding principle. And he gives some examples like lying. He gives the other example of like, if you were to borrow money from someone knowing that you weren't going to repay them, right? Like that's, I guess, kind of lying, right? And just something we wouldn't want people to do. But I think he very much is guided by this sense that human beings need to use their reason and their rationality to make decisions about morality and not their emotions, right? And we need to use our reason to appeal to that, like, what do I want my society to look at, right? Another way, so there are actually 3 ways that he said this. He said, 1, act such that you want all people to act this way. 2, another way of saying the same thing, decide for yourself if this is true or not, but another way of saying the same thing, he claimed, was act such that you always treat people as ends in themselves and never as means to end. So you don't use people, essentially, right? And if you lie to someone, you're using them. And you're not respecting them as full, rational agents and beings, right? So you would lie to Amaya even though she was like holding a knife, because if you don't, then you're not fully respecting her humanity, right?
Yeah.
Now,
would I be disrespecting you?
Well, you didn't lie to me, right? Kant did say, he did have a caveat, and he said that, look, when people break when they stop using their rationality and they break, killing someone is not how we want all people to act, so they are not being a rational being, and so we don't have to treat them like a rational being, and then all of that's wrong, right? So you could have a little loophole there.
Man, that's just... It sounds like, number one, people could really take advantage of other folks that have this kind of moral rigidity. And then number 2, acting the way that you want all of society to act, that sounds idealistic. Like, it's not like, hey, I've come up with this maxim, and then all of a sudden everybody's like, oh yeah, let's just do that together. And
and Kant himself said, like, look, this is aspirational.
Okay.
We're trying to hit the third way of sort of formulating his maxim is like, act such that we are creating a kingdom of ends, and by that he means like a purely kind of rational world, right? And yeah, it is idealistic, and Kant would say like, so, he's also the guy who like wrote an essay called Perpetual Peace, and like, he was an idealistic guy.
Was he like the 1890s hippie or something like that?
He never left town and never got married, and did a lot of reading and writing. So if that's the 18th century.
Peace. Oh wow. Well, he sounds like one hell of an interesting guy to read about. Not necessarily it doesn't seem to fit well in modern society, in my view.
Well, in a way, I think a lot of people aspire to live by those principles.
Okay.
When I was growing up in a religious household, I was taught the 10 Commandments and aspired to act according to them. The problem is that like the real world is really messy, and human beings are really messy, and we bump into all these situations in which that kind of like ideal way of acting seems irresponsible. There's something in us that says that just seems irresponsible.
Mm-hmm. So I guess in the complete opposite of Kant's commandments, do we have moral relativism?
Yeah, so Kant himself was an absolutist. There's sort of these two ways of thinking about morality in terms of meta-ethics, or like the ethics about ethics, study of ethics, right? We can think of morals as being absolute, and Kant's certainly were very absolutist, right? Here are these guiding principles. Here's how these actions fall into these principles. This is the truth. And Kant thought he got access to the truth, like from on high, not from on high, but through reason, right? He didn't say God. He said nature with capital N, right? Nature is what gives us these laws, and our human capacity for reason is how we can understand and get access to these moral truths. But it was this very absolute way of looking at it. Whereas, way back where Plato and Socrates were asking, do the gods love it because it's the right thing, right? Or is it the right thing because the gods love it? Mm-hmm. It's really asking like, okay, well, is that just you, an old white guy who's deciding that reason and, this is the right thing to do? Or is that actually just a really culturally specific way of interpreting right and wrong? And that the truth is that every culture has their own ideas of what's right and wrong. And those sometimes come into conflict. And neither one is more good or real or true than the other. And that, in fact, they're just different. That's it. They're just different. And that, I think, is appealing in some ways and hard in other ways.
Yeah, because then you could justify, let's say there is like this new community in the Arctic that kills the first child of the family because they want to sacrifice it to the gods, or because they think it's the right thing to do, which obviously we would be horrified about that, but I guess with that reasoning you could justify it.
Yeah, they would just say, this is sort of the hardcore moral relativist would say, like, look, an anthropologist by the name of Ruth Benedict was someone who like kind of famously talked about this. She studied lots of different people around the world and said, like, look, there are some people who they have human sacrifices, or they infanticide is an appropriate thing to do if we just had a baby, we can't feed it, everyone else is going to be hungry, we're going to leave the baby in the snow. And that's actually the right thing to do. That's morally appropriate according to this culture, right? Or that, all of these different practices, right? That we, from our vantage point, might look over there and say, that's horrible, that's morally abhorrent, how could you possibly do that? But inside their culture, it's the right thing to do for them. And our way of looking at morality is the right thing to do for us.
Well, and there's a thought experiment too about smothering a baby that's crying. It sounds like this is something along those lines too.
Yeah, right. That's if you're, this was that MASH episode, right? The end of MASH actually this out, right? They're in the Vietnamese jungle and the enemy is approaching and there's a whole house of people hiding out and the baby's crying, right? You gotta get the baby to be quiet, otherwise everyone's gonna be found out, right? Is smothering the baby the right thing to do here?
Yeah.
Right? And that's that utilitarian, right, kind of question. Like, do you do this to save everyone, right? But I think that also the issue of can we actually make judgments about other people's moral actions at all? And if so, based on what? Based on our own opinions of it? Based on a moral code? And if that moral code is in conflict with another moral code, well, who says that you have the right answer, right? Absolutism is really helpful in some ways because it gives you a clear answer. This is right, this is wrong. I don't care if you think the rape of 14-year-old girls by men twice their age is okay. It's the wrong thing to do. I'm just going to say that it's wrong. You're wrong for doing it. It's morally objectionable. No one should do this. End of story, right? I can feel very self-righteous by saying that because I have this moral code that says this is the right way to do it. And the problem with that is that who's to say that I'm the one with access to the truth instead of those people? And if I claim that I have access to the truth and other people are simply mistaken about their moral ideals, that actually gives me license to kind of impose my will upon them. Maybe go to where they live.
Okay.
And tell them that their way of living is stupid and backwards. And here, you should read this book because it has the truth.
So what do you think is like at the core of ethics? So in the sense that, is it well-being? Is it happiness? Is it avoidance of suffering? Is it something else that I'm missing? Because I feel like, I'm not sure, obviously there isn't an agreement on what it is, but do you have like an opinion on what would be the core thing that we're after with morality? Because I feel like that would answer a lot of questions.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good starting point. I'm not sure if I have a clear answer. I have some ideas, like one would hope that we would be able to have a moral code in which we were able to support and allow for the flourishing of the lives of most people in our society, even if they disagree, right? But like diversity is a value of mine that may not be someone else's value, right? So I tend to be kind of a relativist, honestly, even though it's kind of like in some ways, relativism can be really dangerous. And I think that often what happens is that I would see this a lot with like freshman philosophy students who tend to be very relativistic, and it's just like, well, we don't want to tell anyone how to think, and my opinion is just my opinion, and your opinion is just your opinion, and neither of us are right or wrong, and so we're just not going to talk to you, right? And I think what happens is that sometimes people can get really lazy, and they can just say like, well, we're just different, the end, and not actually have any kind of conversation or debate about why you believe what you believe or why this person. So I think it's important for us to try and communicate with each other and understand our beliefs and understand other people's beliefs and see perhaps maybe there are some values in common and maybe we can build a relationship on those common values, but that takes work. And so just saying that like your beliefs are different than mine and the end and we'll just like not talk about it or like not pretend like it's important, that to me just seems intellectually lazy. So
yeah,
it's a very long answer to your question. I think that asking what is the goal is just as problematic as asking what the answer to the solving the goal is, right? Because everyone might have different answers about what the goal is.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I feel like it's the question, right, of ethics, I guess, because once you have solved that question, if there is a solution, then you have kind of agreed to what it is that we are trying to do here with morality and ethics and trying to make the world a better place. So, yeah. But no, thank you for sharing your thoughts because I wasn't aware that students are kind of famous for being relativists, so that's quite interesting. I wasn't expecting that because I feel like when you're just starting uni, you probably just want to argue more and you want to debate more and be more challenging. So it's interesting to know.
Maybe it depends on where you are in the world, so what sort of flavor you get. I think different cultures have different kind of norms about that. I think certainly right now in the U.S., people are much more divided and absolutist, perhaps, about those things than in generations previous.
So I hear what you're saying about how cultures have different sets, and who am I to say that this is wrong in their culture? But and here comes the but I see things that are, awful and affecting other people, like, being shot for not wearing a hijab, or, cutting off people's arms or hands or fingers for stealing. What my initial instinct is to kind of like judge them, like this is not the right thing to do. But, again, you're telling me that this is the morals that exist within their culture. But I'm also hearing you say that one good way to possibly handle that is to have a conversation with them and discuss why I think it's bad and why they think it's okay.
I mean, yeah, if you can find someone to have that conversation with you. Yeah, I mean, I think that I too, like when I say I'm a relativist, I still have my own moral code, right? I was raised in a certain culture that taught me that certain things were right and certain things were wrong. And I'm, a humanist and a feminist, and those come with certain, ideas about right and wrong, right? I think that like a not racist society is a better society than a racist society. And I think, that the subjugation of women is morally abhorrent, right? Or abhorrent. And I recognize that I come from a certain time, in a certain place, a certain part of the world. And the reason I think it's wrong is because I see the world from that perspective. So I try and, I mean, in some ways, I feel like I'm trying to have it both ways, right? Where it's like, that's wrong. I think it's wrong, but I'm aware that I think it's wrong. And I don't know that I want to say that my way of viewing the world is any supernatural source.
So I'm going to change your name here in Zoom to Danielle having her cake and eating it too.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, and it also kind of goes to what you're talking about, like viewing people from the past and some of the things that they thought were acceptable, like slavery is a prime example, or I don't know why I'm blanking on another example, but it almost seems like you're asking us to hold two conflicting ideas in our head at the same time.
I mean, I don't know that I'm asking anyone else to do that. I'm just trying to explain how I kind of move through the world. I think that for me, there is this strange paradox to it. And we talked about this a little bit when I was on previously, where like the metaphor is, I think you can play soccer really hard, right? And you can like play this sport and you can believe in it and play according to it, and people hold people accountable to the rules of the sport, all the while knowing that the rules are just sort of arbitrary and made up. They're not they don't come from the heavens, right?
Oh, and they change over time.
They change over time, and they are human inventions. And so I think that that's kind of how I tend to view it.
So as a big soccer fan, I can feel justified in looking down upon the football fans.
Well, I mean, I think technically we have to call it football if we're going
to be. Good point. So where do we kind of go from here?
Well, I do want to mention the last big sort of school of thought in the philosophical ideas about ethics. And that is, so we have utilitarianism, which is sometimes called consequentialism because it's worried about the consequences of actions. There's deontology, right, which was Kant's you don't use people and things are either right or wrong. And then there's a third school of thought that comes from Aristotle, and it's called virtue ethics. And virtue ethics is this kind of, the idea is that people are building moral character over time, that moral character is a behavioral thing that's done, it's not like here's the rule, you have to adhere to the rule correctly always, or you're an immoral person. It tends to be a little bit more flexible. And what Aristotle said is that what we're trying to do is go for the, he said the mean, the golden mean between two extremes. So, for example, temperance is the mean or the middle point between like overindulgence and sort of asceticism. Like, you don't want to be too far one way or too far the other way. Another example is like, courage is the middle point between cowardice and foolishness, right? So you want to try and figure out what the kind of middle virtue is, and then you want to live your life in such a way that you're trying to aim for the middle of those two extremes. And what Aristotle says is that there is a right thing for each person to do, but the right thing to do depends on who you are, what the situation is, and you have to act like in the right amount, in the right way, at the right time, for the right reason, for the right length of time, etc. That there is a right for that, but it varies from situation to situation. So that is sounds kind of good in that it's like, okay, you're shooting for the middle and that seems right, but then it's like, okay, but do I actually have any guidance here, right? And he says it's like the right amount of food. Like the right amount of food for a 200-pound linebacker is going to be different than the right diet for a 100-pound ballerina, right? There is a best diet for both of them, but it's going to be different depending on who they are and what the situation is, right? And Aristotle thinks that morality is like that. So it's a little bit, it's like both absolutist in that he thinks there is a right answer, but that is very dependent on the situation.
It kind of, until you said it's quite absolutist, it kind of reminded me of relativism because it's like depends on the situation, blah, blah, blah. So I feel like it's a very, I find it the most difficult to understand. I think it's just like somewhere in the middle that's not either one of those. I don't know. It's just a bit strange. How would you apply it? I don't know. Do you know any modern philosophers that apply it with real ethical issues? And if so, can you give us maybe an example? An ethical example.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of a modern virtue ethicist. I actually think that they seem to be common. An example would be, let's say anger, right? If you're dealing with anger, right? So Aristotle, he was a Greek. He was not a Christian. I think that, there is this kind of, at least the way that I grew up and the kind of Christianity I grew up with, it was anger is something that you should never have or you'll be a bad person. Even though, and Aristotle as a Greek was just no, anger is appropriate sometimes, right? Righteous indignation is an appropriate moral response. If you see, so for example, if you see someone being treated unjustly, you ought to be angry about that, right? That you can, but you have to be angry in the right way, for the right person, for the right amount of time, right? With the right kind of response. So if, I see this person who is the victim of racism, for example, right? You have to think of based on who I am, based on who those people are, what is the right response here, right? And the right response might be different depending on who you are and who that person is, right? And who the situation are. Aristotle says the right response is hitting that golden mean, finding the bullseye of the arrow, or however you might say that, right? Finding the bullseye and trying to navigate towards it. But it's not, again, it's a nice guiding principle, but I'm not sure that it actually tells you what to do in any given situation.
So you have to be the one doing all the thinking. It's not a guide of rules. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So those are the three big schools of thought in ethics about, and you'll notice that none of those appeal to God. None of those appeal to scripture or religious texts. They all are ways of thinking about morality and thinking about ethics that are independent of any theology, right? And they each offer something different. They each offer sometimes really clear good guidance and sometimes muddy and not clear guidance. They all actually sort of make some basic assumptions, though. They all make the assumptions that we are like autonomous, free-thinking, rational agents who can make these sorts of decisions. And in like the 1980s, a bunch of feminist philosophers popped up and they were like, what about caretakers? Or what about people in uneven power relationships like parents and children? Like sometimes, like the right thing to do differs when someone has dependence and they can't just like be their own autonomous individual person that can make these decisions, right? So I'm not sure that I feel like when I learned about all of this stuff, I remember learning about those different schools of philosophical thinking, learned about utilitarianism. I was like, yes, that's right. That seems like the right thing to do. Absolutely. Let's all act like that. And then, we read a couple of like pro-utilitarian articles and then a couple of like, but here are all the problems. And I was like, oh, no, that's bad. Let's not act that way. And then I was like, well, here's deontology. It's like, that's the way we should do it. Right? And I went through that over and over and over again. And finally, at the end of the course, I was like, I'm more confused than when I started. I don't know what to do. I really just wish that I could go back to the Bible and just like have it tell me what to do in every situation. But at that point, it was already broken. I couldn't go back. And then I had to do the hard work of moving forward and figuring out, okay, well now it's up to me. It's up to me to figure out what my moral code is and how to orient myself in the world. And I went looking, and I think, I still don't have a clear answer about a lot of things,
That's fair. Do you have any, maybe I'm putting you in the spot here, but do you have any that you prefer, like not to follow blindly, but, anyone that convinces you more than the others, I guess?
Well, I mean, I tend to agree with a lot of the philosophical tenets of Buddhism. And Buddhism has its own moral code, it's called the it's called the Noble Eightfold Path. And the idea is like, if you do these things, you will get closer to enlightenment. And they include things like, they call them right speech, which means like, speak truthfully, don't gossip, don't use your speech to harm people, right? Right action, which means like, don't kill other things, don't steal, and not because those things are absolutely right or wrong, but because what they do is they strengthen your attachment to your ego, and they make you more selfish, essentially, because you are taking things that don't belong to you because you want it. And whenever you do something just because you want it, you're strengthening that ego attachment, and it's going to get you further away from real happiness. And I think it's hard for people sometimes who lose faith in religion, because the idea that God will punish the wrongdoers can actually be really comforting for people, right? It's like, well, these people acted totally unjustly or immorally, but they're going to have their day, right? And they'll have to face, St. Peter or whatever at the pearly gates. And I think it's really hard if you once counted on that as being this kind of like moral, evening the moral scales to the universe. And then if you lose that, then it's like, well, so what? Might makes right? Like, it's just chaos. It's like, where's the judge in the sky? Like, who?
Oh my gosh. That was the biggest thing for me too, or one of the biggest things. It's like, wait, it's just us? We have to take care of ourselves? And so many things just fell down. It was like a cascade of dominoes, or like a card, or a sandy foundation, whatever metaphor you want to choose. It all just kind of fell apart. And we talked about this on a past RfRx about how like the existential crisis, and like, oh my God, this is so depressing. But yeah, that was something that was tough to come to grips with. Where is my Sky Daddy judge? And how, aren't these people going to get their comeuppance and somehow get, because they need to get punished, right? Yeah. So it was sobering, realizing we were all alone, and it was just us having to deal with this.
Yeah, it is. And it's just like, if you subscribe to a certain view of justice and you feel like you don't have a judge to enact that justice anymore, it can be really destabilizing. And so to answer again your question, Maya, like my approach to that tends to be like, I look at people who are harming others, knowingly or unknowingly harming others, myself included, right? Like, I'm sure I unknowingly harm people all the time, and sometimes even knowingly, right? And we do this as human beings, and it hurts us. It hurts others, but it also hurts us. And it hurts us either because we're ignorant, or it hurts us because we are really attached to our own little precious ego. And that pain and suffering is its own.
Yeah, that's a great way to close the session. A bit sad, but I feel like it's, I don't know, it doesn't take away from the power that we have also, in the sense of we don't need a supernatural being to know what's right and wrong. We can figure it out ourselves, even if we have our differences of opinions. I feel like we can definitely still make more progress in the world than just blindly trust this, as Eric called, Sky Daddy, to make sure that everything is okay. Then let's go to Q&A questions straight. So the first question I'm going to ask is, I'm really glad that someone asked this, because if not, I would have to ask on my own, and someone did it for me, so thank you. So someone mentioned Sam Harris, and I've been reading his book about morality, the moral landscape. I don't agree with him fully, but anyway, he kind of says that we can get answers, ethical answers by science. So like answers to moral questions via science. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about this. And the specific question is, yeah, basically that one. And then like a follow-up is, how about evolved biological contributions to morality? So this idea that morality only exists because we have evolved to avoid extinction, and morality is just a good way of promoting survival amongst ourselves.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I tend to be like I said, I tend to be a humanist, and what I mean by that is that I believe that values originate with humans. I think that sometimes people can look to the natural world as a moral guidance, right? We can say like, oh, we see that animals acting this way, so we ought to act that way, or we see that the moral universe is in balance, and so we need to be in balance in a certain way. But I think that is always filtered through our human interpretations. And so I'm not even sure like science is just a description of the natural world, and morality is about what should be, right? Or what ought to be. And I think that those are two different things. Like, one is a description of what is, and one is a description of what ought to be. And I think that the first is the purview of science, and the second is the purview of philosophy. So I think that we can look to science for evidence to support our claims about what's right or wrong, if we have a claim in which science seems relevant, right? Or the natural world seems relevant. But I'm not sure that, I guess I would want to know more about what that would look like to know if I find it relevant.
Yeah. I mean, just to clarify, he basically says that the core value that humans value is well-being. So basically anything that gets us closer to well-being, that is what we should be doing, because that is what we all value. He thinks obviously that is subjective and blah, blah. So in that sense of like, if we have a common goal, there is a specific way in which you can get to that goal. That's what he says.
But choosing the goal is such a endeavor, right?
That's the issue.
I agree, right? Like if we should look at the evidence, right? And we say like, if the goal is for everyone on the planet to be able to eat as much as they want, or to be able to eat enough to stay alive and not be sick or malnutrition, right? If that's the goal, then there might, like, science, sure, that we can turn to the scientific world and tell us how to do that, and that can help guide us in our actions. But we as humans have to decide what the goals are, and that's based on values. Those
Yeah, thank you. That's fair enough.
What did I answer this question?
I think so. They kind of go hand in hand. I think is the second question was about how we have evolved to have morality, and what your thoughts are about that.
I don't know. I don't know what I think about that. I'm not. Evolutionary psychology is interesting, but I don't. Some of it I just don't know very well, and some of it I'm skeptical about. So, Eric, you had a.
I sure do. We got another question here, and it's kind of a practical one. So, what kind of suggestions would you make for a person who, is a non-believer and they're approached by their religious family, stating that you are immoral because you're a non-believer or an atheist? What are some of the how would you kind of start or carry on a conversation like that?
I mean, so I tend to, my approach with those kinds of conversations tends to follow the Socratic method, right? So Socrates was really known for getting his point across by just asking a lot of questions. Essentially, you're asking someone to support their own point of view and asking what they think, and when you see conflicts or you see vagueness or whatever, you ask them to explain further, see if they can resolve any tensions or contradictions or vagueness, make it more precise. And I think a lot of times that is a way of, I think you ought to do that with the purpose of understanding. I think having these kinds of conversations with the goal of trying to change other people's minds rarely actually works, because I think that people's beliefs are not necessarily based on reason. I think they're based on emotions. And I don't just mean religious people, I mean all people. I think many of our beliefs are actually we're emotionally connected to them. That reason and rationality has a very small amount to do with it. So trying to change someone's mind generally will not go well. Trying to understand them, though, and when you don't understand them, helping them understand themselves, I think tends to be a little bit more effective. And in my experience, what sometimes happens is that someone will say something. It's like they say, "Okay, you're immoral. All right, so can you explain that to me?" Right? And people will start talking. It's like, "Well, what do you mean by that?" Or can you that seems kind of vague. Can you expound on that? And often people will get to a point in which they can't respond, right? There's a point of conflict that they can't resolve, or there's a vagueness that they can't make more precise. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong, but it does mean that that there may be something there where you can just say, like, that tension there doesn't work for me, right? So it works for you, but it doesn't work for me, right? And if you want me to look at my morals, you can say, I believe that we can have moral codes independent of God. And if God came and told you that killing and raping people was okay, would you go and do it? If God told you to kill your firstborn child, would you do it? Mm-hmm. And if not, well, what does that say about your relationship with God? And if so, then what does that say about your relationship with ethics?
I do like your the Socratic approach. It's something that I utilize and really enjoy kind of exploring with other people and kind of understanding them more, coming from curiosity point of view too. One of the questions I kind of do ask is I like turn it around. So if you like, I would just talk to my friend or family member. Like, if you suddenly lost your belief, would you automatically become immoral? Would you go out there and steal and murder and you do all the horrible things you think that the immoral things that you think atheists do? And yeah, more often than not, the answer is no. I wouldn't do that. And me as an ex-believer, I can say like, well, then how am I any different? Like, that's I would do the same sort of thing.
Well, and not only that is that your actions. It's like, well, I am telling, I'm being honest and I'm trying to help people, not because I fear punishment or want reward from the great sky wizard. I'm doing it because I think it's the right thing to do, because I think it's the right thing to do, not because I'm out of fear of punishment or promise of reward. I'm doing it out of my own sense of my own moral character, my own internal moral compass, and to me that seems more.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Someone else asks, is it morally wrong to celebrate the extinction of theistic beliefs?
So wait, is it wrong to celebrate the extinction of what?
Of theistic beliefs, so like of religious beliefs.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think what happens a lot of times with people, especially if you came from a religious background and felt particularly harmed by it, and see the harm that has been done by it, that people are really tend to be very skeptical and judgmental of people who hold those beliefs. I tend to be a little bit more pragmatic about it. I mean, I think that religion helps a lot of people, actually. I think that it gives a lot of people a sense of community, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, guidance. I think the Ten Commandments are not a bad moral code to live by, right? Like, sure, go for it. And so I think that in the name of religion, lots of really atrocious things happened. And those things are bad, but, the foundations of like be kind to others and like treat other people well seems to me to like not be a problem. So I think that it's important for all of us to be nuanced actually when we make our judgments about religion and those who follow religion. I think that, we're all walking around with ridiculous beliefs in our heads, right? Like I just explained to you how I like believe two contradictory things at the same time. And I walk through the world with these two sets of beliefs in my brain all the time. And someone who is, if I had a religious person having this conversation with me, they would probably look at me and be like, you clearly don't know what you're talking about, right? And, sure, they can think that. So I think that we have to be open and humble and understanding. And just because we've stopped believing something that other people believe doesn't make us right. It really doesn't. I think that you might believe that you're right, and I believe, I feel comfortable not believing in that religious faith, and I think that my worldview aligns with science and, lots of other things that I value. But I'm not going to, celebrate the collapse of Christianity because it doesn't really matter to me.
All right. And we got one final question. Is there a moral code that does not have the potential to be taken advantage of?
I mean, I guess it depends what you mean by taken advantage of. I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably not. That people have used and abused the words of great thinkers for their own purposes for a long time. And I think it's up to us as critical thinkers to be able to differentiate between the parts that we want to accept and the parts that we find morally good and the parts that we reject. I mean, that's the task of all of us. And we have to, I think if we're going to say all right, I'm going to be fill in the blank now, and I'm going to follow this moral code, and I'm just going to go for it, and because it's the right one. Well, one, you fall into those absolutist problems of believing you're right and everyone else is an idiot, and then you lose your humility, and you lose your capacity to grow, and you lose your capacity to learn from other people, and maybe you start imposing your thoughts on them, and then you turn into the very thing that you didn't want to be. So I think it's up to all of us to continue to be humble, to continue to think critically, to be nuanced, to use our good judgment to navigate through the world, which is always changing underneath us and which we always need to change it. And there is no clear, clean answer, but welcome to being alive.
That is such a great sentence to finish the session off. I feel like we could just set it as one of the greatest sentences of RfRx session. So thank you for that.
Danielle, as you well know, we have a hangout session afterwards. You think you can stick around? I think that some people might have some additional questions for you.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here. I know that we thanked you at the beginning, but this was a lot of fun, and I really, really appreciate your time. Thanks for doing this for us. Guys, you can find out more about Danielle. We're going to put some links in the chat to learn more about her. And we're also going to put some references, dump some references that she has provided for us into the chat as well. While I'm doing that, Amaya, how about you tell us what's coming up next week?
Sure. Before, thank you, obviously, Danielle, for the presentation. It was really nice to listen to be more aware of the different thoughts campuses, I guess. I don't know which words you used, but the classifications of how we use ethics in philosophy, I think that was really useful, because I feel like I've read a lot about utilitarianism, but not so much about other perspectives. So I'll definitely try and make some more reading about that. So next week we're going to have David teach out, and he's going to tell us about how to recover from the identity that we had as religious people. So obviously, rooting your identity in religion is something that you can't just make go away from one day to another. It's a very traumatic experience. It's very difficult to get over. So he's going to give us a few tips. He's going to explain how it all works and how we can overcome these issues that come from tying our identity to religion. So if you want to watch it, please join us next week. That will be amazing. And I am going to launch the second poll, which is the feedback poll. So the questions here are from 1 to 5, 1 being not at all relevant, 5 being very much relevant. So the first question is, this program was relevant to me. The second question is, the speaker was clear and understandable, again from 1 to 5. Third one is, I will definitely attend future programs like this, from 1 to 5. And then the last one is, how do you find RfRx tonight? First option is via the RfR online community /Slack. The second one is via a meetup event. Third one is via Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. And the last one is other. And if it is other, I'm going to ask you if you feel comfortable to just let me know in a private message, if that's okay. And now I have the unbelievable pleasure of introducing all of you to our amazing Gayle Jordan, who is going to have her RfR moment, which is meant to be 60 seconds, but we all know that's never going to happen. So, Gayle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amaya. Danielle, what a wonderful presentation. I will admit that I had your undergraduate experience of every time you described something, I was like, oh, yes, that's it. That's what I believe. And as we went on, now I think I might be more confused now than before, but I think that's part of the progress. I noticed that my adult children, who were raised in religion for a much shorter period of time than I was, are much more fluent in these discussions about philosophy. They simply were introduced to it at an earlier age. And my grand, who's 15, and he's being raised in a secular manner, is so comfortable with all of the philosophical discussions. And those of us who were raised in religion just don't have we don't have the experience and the skill set of thinking these through when our minds were good and green and juicy. We didn't get there until we were sort of hardened. And so it's harder for us. I think it's harder for us. My kids and then my grandson are just more comfortable with it. So that was the observation I made tonight. When I was in law school, one of my favorite professors said, it's easy. The answer is always, it depends. So I guess it's all moral relativism. Anyway, Danielle, it was wonderful. I'm really looking forward to the discussion part amongst our fellow attendees to see if anyone else is having that same experience. Thank you, everyone, for attending. These Monday nights have become, for all of us, so important to us in this time of isolation, and to see your faces and to see just the human contact and to hear your voices and to read what you're sharing with one another really is the highlight of my week. Recovering from religion, Eric and Amaya did a beautiful job at the beginning of the meeting telling about how all of those pieces come together. We call it, our mission statement's pretty straightforward. We provide hope, healing, and support to folks who are struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. And as Eric and Amaya walked us through and talked us through where the support groups fit in and where the helpline fits in and where RfRx fits in, it's a beautiful picture of what we do. We are always looking for folks to join our volunteer team if this is something that you feel like you're ready to do and ready to pay it forward. So to speak, we would love to have you join our team. We provide you training. We won't send you out there without the confidence of knowing how to help someone as they question their beliefs, and wherever it is on the spectrum that they fall, we'd love for you to do that. In addition, we always rely upon the donations, financial donations of folks who share our passion. I know we're in a tough time, and not everyone has the ability to do that. Not everyone can volunteer, and not everyone can donate. But if you find yourself in a position to be able to do that, our support groups, as wonderful as they are, they're in 50 cities, and Eric Wells, as our support group director, has done a phenomenal job of recruiting leaders and training leaders. Those come at a cost of about $15 a month to provide those meetup groups. If that's something that you feel like, I could do $15 a month, I can. And I'll make you a promise here. My treasurer and Eric and everybody else may be falling apart whenever I say this, but if you would like to sponsor a group, I'm happy to find whatever that group is. Maybe it's in Des Moines, maybe it's in Sacramento, maybe it's in Tampa. Wherever it is, if you would like for them to know that you're sponsoring their group because you feel compelled to do that, I'm happy to let them know that. We can put a little tag. Eric, don't roll your eyes at me. We can put a little tag on their meetup group saying, this group for this month is sponsored by this person because you cared enough and you were passionate enough about what they're doing and what we're doing as an organization, as a nonprofit. We're happy to do that. Thank you again for coming. And Dale, thank you again for a wonderful presentation.